You know, brothers and sisters, her early memories would not have been good ones. She would remember as a child those dark, dark nights in the Israeli settlement when the Egyptian soldiers would come with torches to do the foul work that Pharaoh had given them to do. She remembered the sound of the swords being pulled out of the scabbards, of women screaming in their homes as the soldiers kicked down the doors. She would remember their shrieks and the sobbing and anguish and the deadly silence throughout the settlement after. She would remember how she had helped her mother and her father to keep her beloved little baby brother as quiet as they could. In circumstances like that, a little girl grows up too quickly and loses her childhood. Exodus chapter 2 says, "There went a man of the house of Levi and took to wife a daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived and bare a son. When she saw him that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. And when she could not longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes and daubed it with slime and with pitch, and put the child therein, and laid it in the flags by the river's bank." And can you imagine? Can you imagine what would go through the heart of this mother? What does she show? She shows the best of what a believer can show. She did everything that she could do with her mind, her ingenuity, and left everything else in God's hands. In faith. Believing completely that God would do something. God would do something. And then it says, in the next verse, "And his sister stood afar off to know what would be done to him." His sister stood afar off to know what would be done to him. Now how old is Miriam at this point? We don't know. What, 10, 11? She couldn't have been old enough to look like she was of childbearing age, because that would be a tip to Pharaoh's daughter that might be the mother. And in this day, in this time, people had children at the age of 15, sometimes 14, 16. And so she might have been a very young girl. Now, there's no indication that her mother sent her. None at all. It doesn't say, "and her mother sent her," to see what would happen to the child. So that means that this little girl so loved this baby, was so tied in her mind to her beloved little brother, that she was not going to let him out of her sight. She goes down to the water and she's standing and watching. What does it show? Strength. A powerful mind. A personality that will not be put down. She's indomitable. She's so strong-willed that she will not give up in this time of incredible crisis. She watches over him to make sure everything is all right. She watches where the ark is. She makes sure water isn't in it. She looks to see that there's nothing that could endanger him. There's courage. There's compassion. There's intense love in this little girl. And it says, when the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walked along by the riverside, when she saw the ark among the flags, sent her maid to fetch it. When she had opened it, saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. She had compassion on him, and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, now you just stop there for a second. This is Pharaoh's daughter. According to the beliefs of the land, this is the daughter of a god. According to the social customs of the time, you did not ever talk to someone at this level of society if you were a servant in the palace, unless you were an extremely senior servant in the hierarchy. And you did not address them if you were someone who was a Hebrew. You were at the absolute bottom of society as far as the Egyptians were concerned. You didn't come up to Pharaoh's daughter and talk to her. You didn't do that. So that shows a great deal about this little girl. The strength of mind that she has. The courage that she has. There's a forwardness about Miriam that comes out in this little story. And she suggests to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go get a woman from the Hebrews to nurse him? Because he needs to be nursed. Look, he's only 3 months old. He's still a baby. He needs milk. And perhaps the best person to nurse him might be a servant of the Hebrews. Someone that I could bring along. So this little girl has the presence of mind, the wit, to think this through on the spot, on the fly. And just come up with this suggestion to save and protect her little brother. And to give some kind of comfort to her mother at the same time. And Pharaoh's daughter says, yes, go and do it. And so this little baby has not only been saved, but his big sister, still a little girl, still a girl, has engineered a circumstance through the will of God that connects the little boy back to his mother so that she can be the significant influence, together with his little sister, no doubt, or his big sister, in his forming of his personality. So that he knows he's a Hebrew, he understands what it is to be a Hebrew, and he understands to the extent that he'll even see himself before he's called by God to be the one that will save Israel. Now, when we look at the character of Miriam, it's important to remember that she's a firstborn child. We don't realize it as parents, as mums and dads. But we raise our children differently in the same family. If you are a firstborn child, you yourself would know, because you would have said things like, the younger ones get away with things I couldn't even think to do. You have this sense of unfairness. You were not treated the same way as the younger ones. How do we raise the children in the order that they come? Well, when the first one comes along, especially if we're Christadelphian parents, we're programming them for good behavior, doing the right things, achievement. They're the first to talk, the first to walk, first to be potty trained, first to go to school, first to do an exam, first to get a driver's license, first to get a job, whatever the case may be. And they're programmed by us for responsibility and accountability. How could you let your little brother fall from that tree? When you were there, he shouldn't even have been in that tree. You're responsible because you're the eldest. And if you're an eldest child, you would have heard many things like that. Because you're the eldest. So it gives the eldest child a kind of internal, driven nature. We're driven to succeed, driven to perform. We also have a tendency to control, to want to be in charge. If you were to do a survey of ecclesias around the world, and you were to look at the amount of recording brethren who are firstborn children, you would find a very, very high percentage of them happen to be firstborn children. And it's not just by chance. It's because they're quite happy to step up. They want to take on authority roles and roles of power or influence or being in charge. They want to be able to lead and to guide because it's what they're programmed for from the time they're little kids. By the time the youngest child comes along, the parents are tired. They haven't got much energy and stamina left to be able to raise the perfect child. And so this is the child they tend to enjoy the most. They cuddle them the most. They play with them the most. They hug them and kiss them the most. And they're not worried if that child is not perfectly well behaved. But the first one has that programming. And I'm not missing you out, middle children, because I know you're worried about that right now. Right? The middle children are quite wonderful, actually. The middle children are the ones who know how to push everybody's buttons. But they also know how to bring everybody together. And when there's trouble and quarreling going on in a family, the likelihood is the person that's going to be able to best achieve bringing peace and harmony back to the family is the middle child. Because they have that ability to know and to understand the other siblings and their mom and dad. And so in this situation, there's an eldest child, there's a middle child, and there's a youngest child. There's Miriam, there's Aaron, and there's Moses. But Miriam has a particularly close and intimate connection to her baby brother. This is a powerful connection between the two of them. You can see it not just in this little story, but you can see it later on. Later on in the history, in the story, in the narrative, she would see herself as a kind of next in command. Someone who was the helper of Moses. When we go further, we look in Exodus chapter 12. Is it chapter 12? Let's just see now. Yes. In Exodus chapter 12. Exodus chapter 12. No, it isn't. Exodus chapter 15. In Exodus chapter 15, we have the wonderful song of Moses, which celebrates the victory of Yahweh, of the God of Israel, of the Lord, over Pharaoh and all of his forces. And Moses sings this song. And no doubt the men of Israel sang along with him. But it says also, in this very lovely couple of verses, verse 20, Miriam, the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her with timbrels and with dances. And Miriam answered them, Sing ye to the Lord, for he hath triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider hath he thrown into the sea. So there is strong, full-grown, vibrant, energetic, firstborn Miriam, leading the women of Israel in a kind of antiphonal song. The men sing apart with or after Moses, and Miriam responds with the women. And there's this wonderful song of triumph, of redemption, of saving, of salvation, that honors God. And here we see Miriam at her very, very best. Now look what she's described as being. She is a prophetess. A prophetess. Now that word is used in different ways. Sometimes it could refer to a woman who is the husband, or the wife of a husband who was a prophet himself. It's used of a false prophetess also, in the days of Nehemiah. But in this particular case, with Miriam, there's no indication that she had a husband. Now, he would have to be an industrial strength husband, to tell you the truth. Prepared off-site in a factory with a lot of steel in him to be able to cope with this force of nature who was this woman Miriam. There's no indication that she was married. There's Jewish tradition that says she might have been married to one of the men who held Moses' arms up during that great battle that would occur in Israel's history, but there's no evidence of that in the Bible itself. So the indication seems to be that she is a single woman all through to the end of her life. But she's a prophetess. And what does that mean? It means God will speak through her. God will give her messages, move her, inspire her to say things which have their point of origin with Him. That's incredible, an incredible thing. Miriam, as we can see here, leading the women in song, there's an indication of where her leadership was expressed. Her leadership was expressed amongst the women of the congregation. And when you think about the leadership roles that our sisters play in our ecclesias, it's in holding the ecclesial family together with all the love, all the nurturing, all the encouragement, the arm around the shoulder, the hugs, the kisses, the wiping away of tears, the encouragement of other sisters and families in pain. Now this is the kind of thing that Miriam would have taken a significant role in. There was so much to do in the leadership of this large and strong-willed and rebellious people. And the chief leaders would appear to have been Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. Now there's a question that comes to mind when you see the fact that she's described as the sister of Aaron. The sister of Aaron. Now you might ask yourself, why doesn't it say the sister of Moses and Aaron? Or the sister of Moses? Given the closeness of the relationship. The special sense that she had of, that's my brother. I saved him. I watched over him. I love him. He's my brother. There's no mention of Moses. And it's almost as if a very subtle point is being made in this passage. Possibly. And the subtle point could be that Miriam is the sister of Aaron because she is not considered to be at the same level as Moses. Moses was the leader of Israel. Miriam and Aaron had their particular jobs to do, but she was not his equal. And that's going to be an important point, given a situation that will come up in her life later on. And so she is a prophetess. She is the sister of Aaron. And she is a woman who, amongst the women of Israel, is viewed as a leader. A leader. And when she dances, she too gives glory to God and praises Him, along with her sisters and her brothers, all of the men of Israel. And if the story were to stop there, then all that we would have is wonderful things to have read about Sister Miriam. But a wonderful thing about the Bible is that it isn't interested in our romantic notions about the way people ought to be. It tells us about the way people are in real life. Just like us. God sees us and He knows us as we actually are, not as we would like to be known, not as we would like to present ourselves. And when He gives us the light and shade of people's lives in Scripture, it's to exhort us, to warn us, to encourage us, to give us a sense of hope sometimes also. When we see people who had all kinds of strength, all kinds of faith, and yet had their moments of shame, just like we do. Just like we do. We wish we didn't have those moments in our lives. God puts these into the story so that we will know this is human life. It is human life. And the life of a Christadelphian has times of shame, fear, doubt, panic, terror, disbelief, as well as times of love, wonderful work, achievement, good results, and growth all the way through our lifetimes. There are those times of shame. Sometimes we try to cover them up. Sometimes we try to pretend, well, everything's all right with me. And I'm not going to tell you what I'm struggling with in my head and in my heart, because then you would think I'm completely unacceptable. And yet if everybody in this room were to have his or her head and heart opened up, we would realize we're all struggling with something. We're all not coping particularly well with aspects and areas of our lives. We're all doing the best we can, sometimes not doing so well, sometimes not even trying to do the best we can. And making our way from day 1 to day 2 to day 3. Encouraged along the way by the Word, by prayer, by each other's love and company, and by the hand of God in our lives. The hand of God that we see active. And we see that hand most active in our times of failure, in our times of trauma, in our times of suffocating trial. That's when we see His hand at work the most. We're now going to go, brothers and sisters, in this story from chapter 15 to Numbers chapter 12. Numbers chapter 12. Now before we do that, we're going to look at the condition of Moses' mind at this point in time. He is absolutely on his knees in a trench. He's exhausted. The fighting, the quarreling, the issues, the outbreaks that have happened amongst the people have burned him out. Psychologically, he is in an extremely fragile condition. It says in verse 11, Moses said unto the Lord, Wherefore hast thou afflicted thy servant? Wherefore have I not found favor in thy sight, that thou layest the burden of all this people upon me? Have I conceived all this people? Have I begotten them, that thou shouldst say unto me, carry them in thy bosom, as a nursing father beareth the sucking child unto the land, which thou swarest unto their fathers? When should I have flesh to give unto all this people? For they weep unto me, saying, give us flesh that we may eat. I'm not able to bear all this people alone, because it is too heavy for me. If thou deal with me thus, kill me, I pray thee, out of hand. If I have found favor in thy sight, and let me not see my wretchedness. That's the condition of his mind. That's a brother under fire. And if you as a brother in your ecclesia have ever felt like you were at your last lap, that was it, you were about to fall apart, think of Moses. And I know your ecclesia of 50 or 60 people is killing you. But imagine if you had an ecclesia of 1 million people to deal with. 1 million sets of problems. 1 million unique grievances and complaints. A continual lineup outside of your tent all day long. Anger, rage, upset, accusation, judgment being sought. And people didn't just let you go to sleep because their problems were important. And so you had to be up almost all night long. Can you imagine that? You had a sister, she was like a force of nature. One of the biggest influences in your childhood, the early stage, and she was once again a strong influence now. And what kind of wife were you married to, Brother Moses? Zipporah. And this is the kind of soft, gentle girl you married. The kind of girl who picks up her sons a stone from the ground and circumcises them with her bare hands in front of you because you haven't done it. And then throws the flint and the skin at your feet and says, you are a bloody bridegroom to me. Well, sometimes we marry women that are like our mothers, and sometimes we marry women that are like our sisters. Now, can you imagine what the relationship would have been like between proud, strong Miriam and proud, strong Zipporah, with Moses in the middle, the meekest of all men? Can you imagine Miriam looking at him? He's not eating. What is she doing? That stink foreign food that she cooks all the time. Foul stuff. She doesn't even know how to cook our food. She's not one of us. Look at her. Cushite. And as they went head to head, and as an eldest sister might do, Zipporah, this is what you should be doing. Thank you. I know what I should be doing. But I'll be sure to ask you if I need your help. And the enmity, the bruised feelings, the resentfulness, deep in her heart, there's still that little 10-year-old girl. He's my brother. He's mine. And Zipporah, the foreign woman, who has, what does she have? Oh, she's got, what's her connection to all these people? Moses. He's my husband. That's all she's got. And you can imagine these two women at it. And every time they saw each other, the anger, the flushing of their face, the curt, sharp words. You can imagine every opportunity there was to make a slight or to give a dig or a jab, it would be there. You might think that I'm being unkind to Sister Miriam. God loved Sister Miriam. And none of us is one thing only. You're not Mr. or Mrs. Man of Faith. You also have your faults. You have your faults which may have been a condition of the society in which you were raised, as well as your personal faults, weaknesses, and frailties. And those things are there with us, right alongside faith, right alongside of the character of Christ. Those two things that are at war with each other, human nature and everything it's connected to, all its pronenesses, and the life of faith, the mind of Christ inside of us, at war. We're never just one thing. And sometimes that fleshly nature pushes itself forward and dominates a situation, and we can't even pull it back. And these two powerful women, imagine how hard that must have been for Moses, but also for them. And if it were the case that Zipporah, with that strength of will that she doubtless had, showed any kind of leadership ability among the women, and if Miriam were to hear that any of the women were going to Zipporah for advice, sharing their problems with her, and at the tent door, not to see Moses, but to see Zipporah, can you imagine how Miriam would react? Firstborn children are very aware of their responsibilities, their accountabilities, and sometimes their position. And they will fight with tooth and claw to defend their position. Now, when you think about all these things I've just said, you might think, yeah, well, I'm not sure about that. Good. That's fine. Because we need to think these things through for ourselves. And we're doing a kind of swimming between the lines of Scripture in these stories. You've seen a broken, a tired, an exhausted man in Exodus chapter 11. The people have worn him down. He's like a pencil that has been sharpened all the way down to the eraser. And then chapter 12 begins with the following words. And Miriam and Aaron spake against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married. Just think about that. And so in her anger, in the painful grating against each other that Zipporah and Miriam might have had, she defaults to the worst of the worst. And now, race raises itself as a major issue between her and her sister-in-law. Now, there are some commentators that feel that Moses' wife must have died or divorced from him and he remarried, but there's no evidence of that, really. This term that Miriam uses is not about the actual country that the woman came from. It's a general slur against people of dark skin color. Because that's how angry she is with her sister-in-law. Possibly. So she comes, and they come together and says, Miriam and Aaron, not Aaron and Miriam. Miriam and Aaron. There's this strong-minded sister. The only reason she's bringing along Aaron, poor Aaron who's always battered about by circumstances. The only reason that she brings Aaron is to lend some weight and get someone with common cause for their complaint. Now, it wasn't just about Moses' wife. Because in the previous chapter, God had said to Moses, this is what I'm going to do to help you. Choose out 70 men who are leaders amongst the congregation, the ones you know to be leaders. Call them together. And I will come down. And I will take of the power I have given to you, the Spirit I have given to you, and I will share it amongst them. And that's what he did. And then it said of those people, and we're just looking back then briefly at verse 25 of the previous chapter, the Lord came down in a cloud, spake unto him, took of the Spirit that was upon him, gave it to the 70 elders. It came to pass that when the Spirit rested upon them, they prophesied. But not just them. There's 2 people out in the camp who weren't even called that are prophesying. So what does that mean for Miriam's prophecy? I'm at war with a woman who's taking over my role. And now there's all these other people who have this thing that makes me special. I'm not special anymore. I know what I am. I'm good and angry. I'm angry at Moses. Because it's his fault. After all I've done for him, I'm not going to put up with this. And so, it says, verse 2, and they said, hath the Lord indeed spoken only by Moses? Hath he not spoken also by us? And the Lord heard it. And I don't know about you, but that's a very frightening little phrase to me. Just think about everything you have said, that I have said, that we should not have said about someone else. Every comment that had its root in resentment or envy or anger or hurt, that evoked from us an unkind or cruel, cutting or edgy, slanderous typification or simplification of someone else and their personality and their character. When I read those words, and the Lord heard it, it's not just a frightening component of this story, it's something that frightens me and warns me about the things that I say. Now the man Moses was very meek, above all the men that were upon the face of the earth. And some commentators have said, well, it looks a little bit inappropriate that Moses writing these books would refer to himself as, and I was very meek. The meekest man on the earth. Now it could have been that Joshua finished portions, including the death of Moses. Or it could be that the word meek doesn't just mean humble. It can also mean miserable. Miserable. And if Moses were to describe himself this way and say, the man, Moses, was very miserable, above all the men which were upon the face of the earth. That would be one way of interpreting it, because he was an altogether unhappy man. Now, it was one thing, and it was a big thing, to have the burden of the complaints and the accusations of the congregation on you, but to have the closest people to you come and deliver a message like this. He was speechless. He couldn't even speak a word. And Miriam, in her fury, was something that could not even be described. And it says, the Lord spake suddenly unto Moses, and unto Aaron, and unto Miriam. Look at the order. Come out, you three, unto the tent of the meeting. And the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud and stood in the door at the tabernacle and called Aaron and Miriam. Look at the order. The story starts with Miriam first. She's always put last after this. He said, I want you to listen to me. If there be a prophet among you, I, the Lord, will make myself known unto him in a vision. I will speak unto him in a dream. My servant is not so, who is faithful in all mine house. So what's he saying to them? And you're not. Moses is faithful in all my family, the extended people of Israel, but you are not. With him will I speak mouth to mouth, even apparently. That's how close he is to me. And the similitude of the Lord shall he behold. Why were you not very afraid to speak against my servant Moses? The anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. And Miriam, who had said doubtless hard, cruel, and inappropriate things about her sister-in-law, which might even have included things about her racial background and the color of her skin, Miriam, it says, became leprous, white as snow. White as snow. And Aaron looked upon Miriam, and behold, she was leprous. Now don't just imagine that she turned some kind of sparkling white. Look what he says. And Aaron said unto Moses, Alas, my Lord, I beseech thee, lay not the sin upon us, wherein we have done foolishly, and wherein we have sinned. Let her not be as one dead, of whom the flesh is half consumed when he cometh out of his mother's womb. Miriam was rotting all over. The flesh was perforated. It stank. It was hanging. It was bleached white. She was like a foul thing, a dead body. This was a terrible lesson that our strong-willed sister had to learn. For a brief moment, that's what she was like, all over. She'd talked about the blackness of Zipporah, and now she was white as snow and rotting. Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, he screams out, Please heal her, O God. And the Lord in his grace and in his mercy, not because she deserves it, but because he is gracious and merciful. Here's that prayer. And it says, the Lord said unto Moses, If her father had but spit in her face, should she not be ashamed? 7 days? Let her be shut out from the camp 7 days. And after that, let her be received in again. 7 days was the period of time that you were unclean if you had touched or been in the presence of a dead body. Miriam was the dead body. And when we behave like that and say those kinds of things and have those kinds of attitudes, our mind is not in the direction of life, but involved in death. And so it says, she was outside of the camp. She who had said Zipporah should be thrown out, she shouldn't be amongst us. That woman's not one of us. What's she doing here? She should be outside. She now was outside of the camp. And Israel had to stay in one place for 7 days because of Miriam. And afterward the people removed from Hazeroth and pitched in the wilderness of Paran. In chapter 20, brothers and sisters, we're going to take 1 extra minute. My apologies for that. It says, verse 1, Then came the children of Israel, even the whole congregation, into the wilderness of Zin in the 1st month,